Why is Russia the largest country in the world? Its area as of 2023 is more than 17,125,000 square kilometers. The US is the third largest country in the world, not even close to the global giant. But where does Russia get its size? Let's rewind time 1,000 years ago, when Russia was a very small country. Kievan Rus, a small handful of Slavic peoples, led by the dynasty of Rurikhovich, didn't even know that the Tatar-Mongol yoke was coming to them. To protect themselves, it was necessary to conclude the compelled alliance with a long-term prospect and payment to Ottoman Empire. The city, which would later be called Moscow, grew increasingly powerful from the sale of furs that were popular in Europe. As the army grew in strength, the Druzhina began to use gunpowder and new technology, which led to a backlash. By pushing the Mongols further east, Moscow was telling all of Europe that it would no longer allow anyone to attack Russia from the rear. Thus Kiev's Russia became the Russian Empire, which stretched along the Ural Mountains. The country was moving towards success, selling wild animal furs, modernizing military equipment, rifles, and new Tsar, Ivan the Terrible, the cruelest and bloodiest ruler in the history of Tsarist Russia. He gave orders to find natural frontiers in the Far East, since the flat meadows over which the Tatar-Mongol yoke had moved did not guarantee that the invasion would not happen again. A small handful of people heading east met a land sparsely populated at the time. Siberia, cold and icy rivers encompassed the region, but with it came new supplies of valuable furs. Expeditions were very expensive, which meant skirmishes with the indigenous tribes had to be avoided. Offering to become part of Russian imperialism, they bribed the poor tribes. Unfortunately for those who didn't want to agree, a more brutal method worked. The village was burned and the inhabitants were killed. Finally, the goal was achieved. In the 17th century, the Russian Empire reached the natural borders and opened for itself a passage to the Pacific Ocean. Intrigues and palace coups grew in the 18th century, but this didn't stop Peter the Great from going to war with Persia and getting Russia's hands on the southern and western coast of the Caspian Sea. By fighting the Ottoman Empire, Russia was able to seize the lands of the Crimean Khan, which opened up access to the Black Sea, and later the growth of the Russian flotilla. Ambition was growing, which meant expanding. The confederal state of the Rich Pospolita was ratified. In the third partition, the country split completely into two parts. Russia got its hands on the Polish-Lithuanian Principality. In 1812, Napoleon, hoping to win in 1 month, begins his military campaign against the Russian Empire. Alexander first uses the scorched earth tactic, leaving the French invaders without the necessary resources. Napoleon, realizing that winter was coming, escapes from Moscow, trying not to engage in combat with the Russian soldiers pursuing them. Winning key battles, Alexander I, giddy with glory and success, annexes Prussia, Sweden, and Austria, making his victory over Napoleon. At negotiations in Vienna, the victorious country ceded the entire territory of the Duchy of Warsaw to Russia. Later, in 1860, Alexander II signs the Treaty of Beijing with China, which is a continuation of the Treaty of Agun. On this land, Alexander II establishes Vladivostok. In 1867, assessing the profits and losses of Alaska, Russia still decides to give it to the USA for $7.2 billion. By the way, I told you about it in the last video. Check it out and listen more. Japan, embittered by the Russian Empire's excessive influence on Cathay, declares war and seizes the lands leased from China, as well as half of Sakhalin. One of the most famous events in the history of the Russian Empire happened in the year of its destruction: the October Revolution. The Bolsheviks staged a revolution in 1917 that led to the loss of control of most of the Western countries of Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine due to the invasion of the German invaders. By the end of 1918, the Bolsheviks had elevated their status and were able to regain control of almost all of the Western countries, the former Russian Empire. Comrade Lenin leaves because of an intolerable illness in 1924. He is immediately replaced by the ambitious Stalin. who the following year annexed the independent islands in the Arctic Ocean to the USSR. In 1941, the Great Patriotic War begins, which ends with the complete surrender of Nazi Germany in 1945. Königsberg is placed under their control by the USSR. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev comes to power. During his reign, there were many terrible events for the USSR. The collapse of the Warsaw Pact, the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, which led to the loss of the USSR in the Cold War, and in 1991, the USSR disintegrated. At this time, a commonwealth of friendly countries between each other is created. Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Lithuania, Latvia, Belarus and a large number of republics become independent of the past state. In the following years, there were no accessions. During its long history, Kievan Rus, Tsarist Russia, the Russian Empire and the USSR lost and annexed new territories. Now its area is more than 17,125,000 square kilometers, which is a little more than twice the size of countries like Canada and the United States. Thank you very much for watching the video. I hope to continue to delight you with the history of the world.